tectonic plates, and we'll get into a little bit of that later on, but it causes some force there, earthquakes, that causes force. It just all sucks the water in and then pushes it all. Creates essentially a huge tidal wave, right? That's what a tsunami is. And even from that virtual video, you can see quickly, not take long for a lot of damage and destruction to be done. In some of the videos that are on YouTube, you see people running and trying to get as up high as possible on buildings and all different things. And the cars floating down the streets and all the stuff that's kind of happening. If you look in, I think, St. Louis right now, Mississippi River has crested pretty bad, and it's flooding down there too. And we've, obviously, some of you all probably remember back in the 70s that, I guess, the church flooded. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, some of you all probably remember that. I know 77, I think, was a big flood right in Haysai as well. And so you know, and we know the effects of the damage of water. And the thing about tsunamis, flash floods, and the reason they're so dangerous is because they come quickly, right? And before you know it, they're kind of there, and they're very powerful. They have very little to no warning at all. And even worse is that they're extremely hard to escape. And if you knew a flood was coming, or if you were in an area where there was a tsunami, what would your response be? If you're in an area, leave if you're able to, evacuate, or at least get up as high as possible, right? And try to get away from the water and that you know is going to be there. Now, tsunamis, flash floods, and the stuff that we can kind of see on a pretty regular basis. Even with the great magnitude of destruction that they bring, obviously those things are a very small, minuscule part of what it was like during the entire worldwide flood of the days of Noah. Okay, Noah. Now, of course, we know the story well. He didn't just go start building his ark and not tell anybody why he was building his ark. He was very faithful and consistent in warning these people that were around him that the world was going to end. There was going to be a flood. There was going to be absolutely nothing left at all. Of course, we know no one listened or heeded to his warning, as we'll see today. And God has given us the opportunity as well to warn the world of the coming judgment that is going to befall this earth and the people on it. And the lesson we're going to look at today kind of help challenge us to do this. It would help if I turned it on. All right. The Grand Canyon there. And some of you maybe have been or not been to the Grand Canyon. I personally have not been, but I have close friends who have been and say that once you get there, it just kind of the pictures and things we see just don't even do it anywhere close to justice. But of course, we know the Grand Canyon, one of the great wonders of the earth and all the kind of the famous things that kind of go on there. And you can see even in these pictures the very, very distinct layers of rocks there, right? I mean, you can see even from the pictures that there are different types of rocks or different layers of rocks just by looking at them. And of course, just a quick science lesson, because that's what I like to do. It's sedimentary rock. Those rock layers just kind of stack up on top of each other. Different types of sediments that are there, different types of rocks. They compact down. That's how these things are, or that's how God kind of created these things. Evolutionary scientists would tell you that each one of those rock layers came after millions and millions of years of time of erosion and all this stuff kind of happened. They'll go into those rocks and be able to see that the ones at the bottom obviously much older than the ones at the top, so that's how they would date stuff. And they find fossils and stuff in these sedimentary rock layers, and that's kind of more of their some of the evidence they try to use for evolution. We're going to get into that more here in just a second, but you can see the rock layers that are there and the very distinct features of the Grand Canyon as well. Now, each layer that is laid down there was laid down by water okay, that was carrying erosion, sediment, rock, sand, gravel, so on and so forth. As the water slowed its movement, okay, those sediments hardened, right? And as those sediments hardened, it then began to form these uniform layers. Now, before the layers hardened completely, more water came through and cut away large sections, as we see, and made new sections. The most plausible explanation here for the formation of the Grand Canyon and the way that it is formed, of course, is a worldwide flood. All right, now, evolutionary scientists tell us that Grand Canyon was developed over millions and millions of years of water kind of running through there and cutting away those rock layers. But there is no greater evidence for a worldwide flood than the Grand Canyon, because that is a large multitude of rock and stuff that has been moved, and it would have taken a lot of force and would have had to happen very, very quickly. Okay, this Grand Canyon that we see it is a reminder for us as Christians and for people that God is in control of things. When He says something is going to happen, we can count on the fact that it is going to happen. Here's some more, maybe another picture too. That's the only one I've got. As you can see, that gives you kind of a side angle view. Really cool to see the different rock layers that are here. We could probably spend a couple hours talking about this, we won't. But it's awesome. God put some of the stuff there, and then the flood kind of created that, and it's just really, really cool to see. The kind of stuff that's there, and water's still running there today, and all that good stuff that happened. It also shows us the power of water, which is pretty wild in its own right. All right, days of Noah. So let's get into one of my favorite parts of scriptures is the flood. And Noah's faithfulness and his sons. And so we'll be over in Genesis chapter 6. This lesson calls for us to go through chapter 6 all the way through 9. We're not going to get through all those today, obviously, but we'll at least look at the days of Noah. So let's read the first 12 verses here. Got a couple things we're going to look at. We're probably actually not going to get to the flood today, but kind of set the groundwork for it. Verse 1, chapter 6, and it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they choose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. And God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented to the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and creeping things, and fowls of the air. For it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. And Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. Now, having previously he revealed himself through the majesty and the glory of creation, the general revelation that we have seen all through the first couple of chapters of the book of Genesis, and the wonder now that we've seen as well of the promise of the gospel that we saw in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. So God's revealed himself through creation. He's given us the promise of the gospel as well. God is going to reveal more about himself in chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9. Okay? And while we have seen God punish Adam and Eve to a certain degree, and we saw some of the judgment because of the sin they had in their life, God's going to reveal more of his hatred for sin here. All right? And I want this to be a reminder as we go through this next couple of weeks. The flood, the destruction of man, man and all the stuff that God had created, right? At the end of chapter 2, God kind of sat back in his recliner and said, what? Did pretty good, right? This is awesome. And he rested and he enjoyed it, and he was probably impressed with his own work, right? Put it simply. And he took time and took care to make sure that Adam and Eve had what they needed. He gave them instructions to name all these animals and have the relationship with them that he did. God took special care in creation. Okay, we know that. He wouldn't have put the detail in chapters 1 and 2 that are there if he didn't want us to understand the importance of creation. He loved his creation. He loved the fact that it was here. Okay? So when we get to chapter 6 and we see God have to, the beauty of his creation that he's given us, he has to destroy it because of what? Sin. So that no matter how much God loved the creation that he gave us and made, he has to judge the sin. And I want us to that's going to be a revolving point as we go through this. God hates sin. Okay? 3 really simple words that carry a whole bunch of weight. God hates sin. He has to judge sin. He has to purge sin from the world, from the lives of his followers, from the lives of Christians as well. And he will do what it takes to purge it. Okay? When we continue to live in the sin, God has to judge it. Okay? And that's just who God is. All right? I've said this lots of times. God has got a love, God has got a grace, God has got a compassion. Absolutely he is. He is also a God of judgment and chastisement and righteousness. He has to be. That's who he is. He wouldn't be God if that was not the case. Okay? So as we go through this, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff we're going to talk about and kind of see here, I want us to remember God hates sin. Okay? All right, so we see this judgment here first being announced, and then specifically over in verses 13 to 21, we won't get there, specifically using Noah as the mouthpiece here to kind of announce this judgment that is coming. All right, now, the population of the earth at this time, no doubt had exploded. Okay? Hopefully next week I'll have my timeline completed for you and I'll have it here. But there's about as much time from creation to the flood in years as there is after the flood to now. Okay, that's close. So you can imagine these men and women are living a long time. Their gene pool, while it has been infected with the curse, of course, is still much better than ours is. They've got the canopy that God had put up for them. They still have this perfect environment that was started. Still, again, much better than ours. Matter of fact, much better than ours. People living a very long time, they had this vapor canopy. The most harmful genetic effects to their gene pool were there, but they hadn't fully taken effect yet. You see that with how long these people were living. So the population had really, really exploded. There were a lot of people on the earth at this time. Okay? But apart from obedience to God, obedience to his revealed truth, the longevity and the physical strength of mankind itself only allowed mankind to multiply his transgressions and multiply the depravity of their state. Okay? It's the fact that these people were living longer, they were still just sinners. Okay? And they were just sinning for longer than we were sinning because they were living longer than we do. Okay? So we can see the depth of the depravity of man at this time. More transgressions, more sin, more presence of sin, and it just continued to explode. Now, what exactly was involved in the spread of sin is not clear. Specifically here in verses 2, 3, and 4, it talks about the sons of God and the daughters of men has been subject to much of the debate. And I had like 5 pages of stuff that went over the sons of man and the sons of God and the daughters of men that we're going to go over. And then the more I kind of processed it and kind of got through it, let's do this. Some Bible scholars identify the sons of God as godly descendants of Seth, and believe the daughters of men were the ungodly descendants of Cain. Okay, and therefore the intermarrying of the godly sons of Seth and the ungodly daughters of Cain, we can kind of see how that would have polluted the righteousness of man even more. Okay. Their intermarrying broke down the walls of separation between believers and unbelievers. They would have been unequally yoked. Other people have identified the sons of God as kings and nobles, who would have been rulers, despotic rulers that would have been polygamous in order to kind of just show their dominion. People who believe that, or kind of go with that, believe the children of these marriages were political giants, would have had a lot of power during this time as well. Some people identify the sons of God as fallen angels that had unions with the beautiful women that would have been on the earth at this time, and would have produced these monstrous, infamously wicked giants. Some hold the view that teaches the fallen angels took possession of men's bodies in an action similar to demonic possession. If you look over in Jude 6 and 7, you can kind of see some of that as well. Jude actually wrote that angels kept not their first estate. Okay, like the Sodomites in Abraham's era, they went after strange flesh. Okay, and if you look at verse 4 with me, there were giants in the earth in those days, and then we see again the sons of God here came into the daughters of men, bare children that became mighty men, which were old men of renown. So there's a lot of debate. There's tons of information about that people have kind of written. I had a ton of stuff here, and then the more I kind of put it together, I don't think God wanted us to spend so much time looking at what bad stuff was happening. There was obviously a ton of it that was going on. I think these verses are here for us to investigate, obviously, but to really kind of help set the scene of just how wicked these people have become, right? We've seen now just in a couple of chapters this perfect union, Adam and Eve. We see the fall, and it's just like this huge, just digression of moral code and morality during this time. Now, it's unclear exactly how the presence of giants that we see in verse 4 here relates to the other details in the passage, but we do know there were giants living at this time, and giants that lived at various times throughout biblical history, especially perhaps during this era, probably more giants, because of the creation of man, more genetically pure. Let's go over to 1 Samuel and look at chapter 17 with me. Verse 4. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits, 9 feet, right? So we know that giants were here. The famous one there in Goliath, we know that Goliath had brothers as well, right? So very apparent. See, obviously, Genesis chapter 6 mentioning it specifically. So as Moses was writing this down, he may have been stating that the offsprings of the marriages described in verses 2 about the sons of God and the daughters of men and the stuff that was going on, maybe that the offsprings of those marriages produced these giants, or he may have just simply trying to allude to the fact that there were giants here, and that would have been obviously a very stressful time for the people who weren't giants, as we saw even later on. The giants of light, giants obviously would have posed a great threat to their own mankind. Okay. And if you all want me to get more into this, I will gladly do that. I have tons of stuff that we can go over. But I think that the reason these verses are here and why God had Moses write them down is to help explain, again, the depravity of man here, to show the wickedness, to show how far man had fallen. Okay? So if we go to verse 5 of chapter 6, we kind of see the culmination of this back in Genesis. And God saw that the wickedness of man was what? Great, right? He sees that the wickedness of man was great. Man, they were completely abandoned to their wickedness. Their thoughts were always evil. Their ideas always evil. The stuff that they were doing directly against what God wanted them to do. Okay? A whole bunch of evilness and wickedness going on during this time. Now, in the Old Testament, the heart that we see used here in verse 5, God saw the wickedness was great in the earth, and that every imagination of thoughts of his heart was continually evil. The heart here in the Old Testament is viewed as the seat not only for the emotion, but also for the understanding and will. Okay? Even now for us today, a lot of times, the heart, we know where the emotions come from it and all the kind of stuff that we use it as, but it's also here used as the understanding and the will of man too. Okay? So it just wasn't that they had the emotional connection to doing these wicked things. They knew what they was doing was wicked, right? And they were doing it anyway. Essentially is what we're saying here. All right? They knew what they were doing was wrong. They just simply didn't care, and they continued to do so. Man was corrupt here in their feelings. Man was corrupt in the thoughts. Man is corrupt here in the choice of actions. Human depravity knew no restraint. Human depravity now knows no restraint. We are wicked, and when the wickedness is left unchecked, it only gets wickeder. Okay? Is essentially what's kind of going on here. And we've said from the beginning, God hates sin. All right? So, the Lord had been long-suffering. He had watched this go on. He had, had to see these corrupt people continue to do more and more corrupt things, to drift farther and farther away from what he had originally set up. And he finally got to as we see in verse 3 of chapter 6, he finally gets to a point where he says that my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is also his flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Okay, so we see that since people are flesh, they're capable of every kind of evil imaginable thing. The exact meaning here of God saying that the spirit striving with man is not clear, but what essentially we can say is that God had gotten sick of it. Okay, God had gotten sick. He'd had enough of this wickedness. He'd had enough of man living these evil ways. All right, the Apostle Paul refers to some similar action here, and kind of brings up some of the same stuff over in the book of Romans. Now let's go over to Romans, and let's go to chapter 1. And look at verse 24 down to verse 28. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving their natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one towards another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves the recompense of their error, which was meet. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. So we see Paul alluding to the same thing here, talking about sinners, their uncleanliness, their vileness, and their unreprobate mind. The disgustingly awful sins that we see celebrated today, the same thing that were happening during the time of Noah. The entire depravity of man and the flip of morality. When good is no longer good, but evil is good. It's a reprobate mind. That's vileness. What we see today, same thing happening during the time of Noah. Okay? Which should be a warning for the world who knows what God has to do. But it's also a reminder for us as Christians that the sin that is here, we hate it. We need to and should be fighting against it. But things aren't going to get better. Right? It's not. Man's just going to get worse and sin's going to get worse and worse and worse, right? So it's just a reminder to us as Christians that we need to stay the course. All right? We need to stay faithful in our walk. We need to stay faithful in our witness. And we need to stay faithful in the way in which we conduct ourselves. Because the world around us is just going to get worse and worse and worse. Now, it's not to be doom and gloom and all the terrible things, but that's just the way things are. The world that Pip is going to grow up in, the boys are going to grow up in, the new baby is going to be completely different than the world that I grew up in. And it's really not been that much longer, not that long ago. The world that I grew up in was different than what Dad grew up in. And there's really not 20, 30, it's not a huge difference in age. The world that he grew up in was different than his, and so on and so forth, right? Because things just continue to get worse. That is important for us to remember that as things get worse, God does not change. God hates sin. God especially hates sin in the lives of Christians. God judges sin. That's what happens. We have to purge that from our lives. Judgment will come, the chastisement will come. God takes us to the woodshed. It's going to happen. Let's try to avoid that, right? This is a simple way to put it. Today, I'm going to try to sin less than I did yesterday. Okay, that's a really simple way to look at it. But if I'm working on that, right, if I'm getting better and better and better at not sinning as much as I did, then I'm getting better and better and better in my walk with God. All right, we're never going to reach perfection. We can't do that. We can't be perfect. Always got something to work on. All right, so we see that the things are bad now, things were bad then, and because of that, God has to judge sin. Now, the 120 years we saw there in verse, was it verse number 3 that he mentions of identifying as mankind's days, probably refers to the length of time here that God is going to give mankind before He is going to judge them. All right, this is going to be, of course, in line with the time it took Noah to build the ark. Now, as we see, things are terrible on the earth. And God sees it and says, I got to fix this. From that point, He then gives mankind another 120 years to fix it. Right? He gives them another 120 years before judging them. Why would God give another 120 years to mankind? Why not just, He could have just blew and wiped them all out. Why would He give them another 120 years? What is God showing? What? Grace, mercy, long-suffering. We can go on and on and on here, right? This was a measure of God's long-suffering with humanity. Even in the state that it's in at this point, God is still long-suffering. He would give them time to repent. He knew they weren't going to, but He would give them time to repent and turn back to Him, even though their wickedness had become in the state that what it was as bad as it had been at this time. But seeing mankind's terrible, sinful condition, we see in verse 6 of Genesis chapter 6 that the Lord repents that He even made man at all, and He repented the Lord that He had the long-suffering that He has here. What it does, I can fix it, Lenny. What it does is that him repenting of his creation, it does not mean that God wished that he did not create people, nor does it mean that he considered his creation of humans to be a mistake. If we go look, and we're going to finish with this, if we look at the actual Hebrew here of the word for repent, it essentially means to a heavy sigh, right? A really deep breath that he gives up. Breathe deeply, as in pain or as in sorrow. So as he's seeing man, he's seeing sin, he's seeing how bad things have gotten, he literally goes in the biggest sigh of human history. Because it grieved him in his heart. Literal translation, that humans had become so depraved. God is holy, God is just, therefore he has to judge sin. And as we see in verse 5 of chapter 6, he says, and God saw the wickedness was great, imagination of evil of the hearts of the men were just going on continually, and he repented of it. We get to verse 7, and the Lord says that because of this, I will destroy man whom I have created, in the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping things, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. He sees it, he hates it, he has to do something about it, so he must judge it. Now, up to this point in history, of human history, no one knew God had decided to destroy the inhabitants of the earth. Nobody knew that yet, right? It's about to change, because in verse 8, in comes Noah. And we'll get more into that next week. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the lesson we had today, for seeing the compassion that you had even in the midst of some pretty terrible things that were going on. But also that you had to do something about it, Lord. As we continue to look through this, continue to see this famous story of Noah and his sons, and kind of look at probably the ridicule that they took and the time that it took them to build the ark. Probably really didn't need to take them that long, and kind of the stuff here that we're going to see through this, how you made the promise that you were going to judge, and you did, but you also made the promise that you would take care of Noah and his family, and you did. And be able to see that contrast throughout this lesson and this moment in history and the literal earth-changing event that it was, how you continue to maintain to be faithful to the ones that were faithful to you. While this is a lot of doom and gloom and seeing consequence of sin, Lord, there's that rainbow, there's that dove, there's the hope as well, the faith and that we have in you. So as we continue to move through this word, I hope we continue to just open up our eyes to the importance of being consistent and faithful in our walk with you. Our prayer for Pastor Rob comes in the next few minutes as well, to just use him in a mighty way. The Lord keeps us attentive, not just with our ears, but with our hearts as well. In our prayer. Amen.